In the autumn of 1898, 4 gold seekers left Dawson and pushed into the Yukon mountains with sleds of food, tools, and hope for a rich strike. The land was cold, the nights long, and at first the signs were small. Silent forests, restless dogs, prints in the snow too large for any man. What began as a search for fortune soon became a fight to survive a presence that watched from the trees, closing in with every nightfall. Something ancient still ruled that valley, and it had marked the miners as prey. So before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks. I stepped off the riverboat at Dawson with a pack that pressed into my shoulders and a head full of numbers. Claims, ounces, days before freeze, miles to the ridge everyone said we had missed. The town rang with voices, tin cups and deals shouted over crates, but I kept my eyes on the head of the valley where the Yukon narrowed and the hills rose in long dark folds. I had not come for the noise. I had come for a quiet gulch and a clean pan. The Mounties checked our gear and our flour. They looked at our faces the way a banker looks at a ledger. We passed without trouble and headed for the mountains that stood beyond the last tent lines. There were 4 of us. Finn had arms like timber and a grin that never settled for long. He could swing a sledgehammer all day and then argue the price of nails at night. Jules was a trapper from the North Country and had the slow way of speaking that makes men listen. He knew where the spruce grew tight, where the willow bent low over hidden water, and how far a sled dog could pull before its breath turned ragged. Harris was the greenhorn with a surveyor's eye and a notebook he tried to hide. He had a way of measuring everything in sight, from creek slopes to the number of beans a man should eat to keep standing. I was the one who sold nearly everything I owned to make the trip, and still felt short on what mattered. I had a sluice frame broken down in the sled, 2 good pans, a small drill, and a promise to a brother in Seattle that I would come back with enough to set us both straight. We loaded the sled with flour, bacon, beans, coffee, and the iron we could not do without. The dogs leaned into the straps and sent the runners hissing over the packed trail that followed the river and then cut east toward a line of hills locals called the Greybacks. The air sharpened each day. The first ice skimmed the river's edge and held the light in a thin skin. By noon it broke in plates that drifted toward Dawson and knocked together with a sound that carried across the water. At night the sky took on a pale band that moved in slow waves, and the cold lifted the breath out of us in soft clouds. We kept our talk short to save our throats. On the 3rd day we passed the last camp that felt settled. A man in a red coat stood outside his wall tent and raised a hand without a word. He had a rifle across his arm and a line of fish laid on a willow rack. Jules stopped to trade for 2 fish and a handful of tallow. The man asked where we were headed. I told him we planned to try a gulch northeast, where the creeks crossed bedrock. He looked past me toward the dark notch between 2 peaks. He said the game had been thin there since late summer. He said he had heard a sound at night that made his dogs crawl under the sled and whine. He told us to cache our food high. We climbed into country that felt empty of men. Spruce stood close and straight. The trail narrowed to a pale cord between trunks. The dogs' paws thumped a steady beat, and the sled creaked on every bend. We crossed old burns where the ground was open to the sky, then dropped into a narrow valley where the creek sounded under skim ice. We made camp on a flat above the water and built a small lean-to with a spruce bow roof and a rock ring for the fire. Harris took notes by firelight. Finn sharpened a pick until sparks showed at the edge. Jules circled the camp once, eyes on the ground, then came back and said nothing. The first odd thing was the silence around dusk. Birds should have moved through the tops of the spruce with the last light, but the branches held still. No squirrel chatter, no wing beats. The dogs stopped chewing and lifted their heads together, ears out, noses up. A smell moved in across the creek. It was not rot. It was not bare. The air carried the odor of a wet animal and turned earth. It passed and the dogs went back to their meal, but they did not lie down after. They sat and watched the dark until the fire sank to coals. We started prospecting in the morning. I carried the pan upstream, while Finn and Harris set the sluice on a patch of gravel where the creek narrowed. We chopped a slot through the new ice and fed the box with shovels, testing every change in color and grain. The gravel was coarse and heavy. A few small pieces of shot gold showed in the riffles, enough to keep our hands moving, but not enough to claim the slope. Jules ranged ahead with his rifle and came back with a grouse and news of a game trail cut wide through a stand of alder. He said the branches were broken at a height no moose reached. He set the grouse on a rock and trimmed spruce boughs for a meat cache, then paused and looked at the dogs. They were staring at the trees across the creek again, motionless. That night the sound came. I woke with the cold on my face, and the blanket creased across my chin. The fire had dropped low and the coals glowed in small pits. A steady breath moved the canvas. I lay still and listened. At first I thought it was the creek, but the creek kept a clean, even tone. This was a slow pressure that came and went, heavy and close. Not wind, not elk. The dogs whined under the sled, and one pawed the ground without standing. Finn sat up and reached for the rifle he kept at his side. We waited. The breath sound stopped. Another noise came from the far edge of camp. A snap, and then a careful rustle as if a boot searched for clear ground. Jules spoke in a low voice and told us not to move fast. He reached for a stick and set it on the fire. The light rose and threw the trees into strong shapes. The camp stood as we had left it. The meat cache on a crosspole hung 10 feet off the ground, untouched. The sled sat with its loops tight. Snow around the fire showed our prints and boot edges. Beyond that, only darkness. Morning showed what night had hidden. Fresh prints circled around the camp at a distance of 30 paces. They were not bare. The shape was close to a wide human foot, with a deep heel and clear toes across the front. Each step sank deeper than ours, and the stride outran even Finn's best reach. We followed the tracks a short way to the edge of the creek, where the ice had been tested and cracked in small crescents. The tracks turned back into the trees and were lost in needles, where the ground held frozen moss. The dogs kept their tails low and refused to cross the tracks. Finn tried to laugh it off and said a man had walked barefoot to scare us. He said the trapper at the river wanted us gone from his hunting ground. He said men will do strange things when cold and envy come together. He said a lot. Jules did not answer him. He walked the circle of tracks again, then lifted his eyes to the trees and looked high as if hunting for a shape above. He told us to haul the food to a higher tree and to set a second cache for tools and light gear. He said we would rotate watches at night. He told Harris to keep the fire strong and to leave a wide, clear space around it. Then he said a word under his breath I did not know and touched a spruce trunk with his hand, palm flat. We worked hard that day. The ground crusted by noon and the creek edge grew teeth. I kept at the pan and took test shovels from the dark seam under the left bank. The color improved by a hair, enough to let hope run a little. Harris and Finn moved rocks to check for a false bed and cursed when a pry bar slipped. Jules ranged wider than before, slow and steady, never far from cover, pausing often to listen. In the afternoon, a rock clacked against a boulder near the edge of camp with a neat, bright sound. We all turned. Another stone landed, smaller, and rolled to a stop. I ran to the tree line and found nothing but shadows and a row of spruce set close together. No movement, no sound. I looked down and saw a third stone half buried in the snow with a wet mark where a hand might have held it. The mark could have been anything. I knew what my mind wanted to make of it and pushed that thought away. We ate early. Bacon, beans, and fish from the first trade. The dogs kept glancing into the trees. After we washed the tin plates in the small hole I had cut through the ice, Jules told a story he had held back. He said he had trapped in this region for 3 winters and had dealt with men from a village downriver who knew the hills in a way that comes from birth and long memory. He said one of the elders warned him about the high country beyond the greybacks. The elder told him there were giants in the timber that did not carry fire, but knew its edge and watched it. They did not care for camps that lingered. They did not steal meat unless hunger drove them. They moved at night and kept to trees during day. A man should not whistle after dark or mimic the voices he hears beyond the fire. A man should not run when a stick breaks behind him. A man should not look a long time into the edge of the trees and forget his own breath. Harris said stories follow cold places the way moss follows shade. He said we would set more snare wire and keep our heads. Finn put his tin plate down and said he would not be driven out by a barefoot prank. I told myself I would finish the test run at the left bank and then we would decide whether to push deeper or pull back to a better creek. I tried to measure our chances the way Harris did, in rows and figures. Food for 19 days if careful. Powder for 6 charges. Sled dog strong but nervous. Tools solid. Gold present but modest. Unknown factor moving around us and growing bolder. The second night we set 2 watches of 2 men. Harris and I took first. The fire pushed heat at our faces and left our backs cold. The sky opened above the black line of trees, and a pale band moved in slow arcs. The creek talked under the ice. Harris tried to keep his voice low and told me about his brother in Winnipeg and the machine shop they wanted to open. He said a few good weeks could buy the start of that shop. He said gold felt simple on paper and rough in the hand. I kept my rifle across my knees and listened to the far side of the camp where the dark seemed thicker. The whistles came from 3 points at once. Short 2 notes, a pause, then a single long note that ran through the trees and went flat at the end. The dogs went under the sled again and pressed their bellies to the ground. I called to Finn and Jules without raising my voice. They were already up. Jules stepped to the fire and lifted a burning stick, then moved it to the far edge of the clearing, set it down and came back for another. He made a second light 20 paces out, so the space between had fewer shadows. He told us again not to whistle back. He said to keep our eyes on the space between the lights and the edge of the trees, not on the trees themselves. I did as he said, and saw it. A shape stood just inside the line of spruce. Tall, broad in the shoulders, arms long enough that the hands fell below the belt line of a man. The head sat low on the body with no clear neck. It did not sway. It did not flinch at the light. It stood and watched. My mouth went dry. I did not raise the rifle. I did not move my feet. The shape shifted once and was gone. Not back into the trees, but along the line, keeping to the cover. A second shape moved behind it for half a breath, then vanished. The whistle stopped. The creek went on. Harris's pencil snapped in his pocket without his hand on it. He looked at me, and I knew his neat rows and figures had scattered. We stayed in our places until the sky lightened and the cold drove needles into our toes. The morning showed new tracks along the tree line, longer than the first set, deeper into the frozen mat. Jules measured a stride with his arm and a stick and looked away. Finn walked the line 3 times without a word, and then said we would finish what we came for. I did not argue. We were not the only men in this country, but in that valley that morning I felt alone in a new way I had not known in any city or camp. We broke ice, set the box, and fed gravel. Each of us glancing at the trees while pretending we did not. The day held one more sign. Around noon, a dry crack sounded high above us, not in the camp trees but on the slope where the spruce grew thin and the rock showed. A dead branch fell from a height and struck the ground near the sled with a thud that shook the gear. It had not broken on its own. The air was still. No frost fell with it. We all looked up. I saw nothing but a line of dark trunks and the pale smear of snow caught on ledges. Jules lifted the branch and turned it in his hands. The break was clean and fresh. He set the branch aside and told us to bring the dogs close at dusk and to set extra wood by the fire. He told us we would not move that night. He told us to set ourselves for a long watch. We stacked spruce and deadfall until the pile stood waist high. Jules set 2 more burning sticks at the edge of camp and cleared snow around each so no ember would creep. He placed the sled near the fire and ran a rope line from the sled to a pine trunk, then tied each dog on a short lead close to the crossbar. The dogs settled on their haunches but kept their heads up. Harris packed his notebook into the bottom of a bag and closed the laces tight, as if a pencil could draw anything useful from what waited around us. Finn sat with the rifle across his lap and worked the action with slow, steady pulls, then stopped and shook his head, angry at his own habit. The light dropped cleanly at the tree line and the cold came up from the ground. I rubbed my hands and watched the space between the burning sticks and the trees. Jules told us to speak only to pass a message and to keep our voices even. He said to call out any movement with clear words, not with shouts. He did not tell a story this time. He did not say any warning word under his breath. He stood near the second burning stick with his rifle down and his eyes level. The first knock came from the slope. 1 hard strike on wood, then another from across the creek, each spaced the same. 3 more followed from farther left, closer than before. The dogs whimpered and pushed their ribs into the sled. Finn raised the rifle and lowered it again. The knock stopped. We waited. A minute passed, then 2. A rock slid somewhere on the slope. Another knock sounded close enough that the air carried a short ring from the trunk that took it. The smell reached us and pressed into camp. Wet animal, old hides, a sour musk that did not drift off. I held my breath, then took a slower one through my mouth. Harris swallowed and wiped his lip with the back of his glove. Jules did not move. He said we should not give ground. He told us again not to aim unless we had to. He said a shot in the wrong second would make the night long for all of us. Snow fell from a branch beyond the light, not from wind, but from weight leaving. I stared into that gap until my eyes watered. The burning stick threw a steady glow, and the dark on the other side held firm. Something stepped toward the far burning stick and stopped. I saw a knee and a forearm for half a breath. Then it drew back. I did not raise the rifle. I held the stock with numb fingers and waited for my hands to stop shaking. A stone came low and rolled through the fire, scattering coals. Sparks rose and died. Finn cursed under his breath and reached for a stick. Jules fixed him with a look and shook his head. We let the fire settle. The two burning sticks still held. The stone had not been thrown hard. It had been placed where it would disturb us and show that the thrower could reach the heart of our camp when it wished. Another sound came from the slope. Not a knock, but a low, rough call that rose and dropped. It held a pattern we could not read. Her second answer came from beyond the creek. Jules said there were at least 3. He said they were talking about us. He sounded like he was saying that out loud, so the thought would leave his chest, not because it would change anything about our next minute. Finn stood. Jules told him to sit. Finn stayed on his feet and said we could not keep waiting like stumps. He said the meat and flour would not last forever. He said the gold would not wash itself out of the creek. He said we could break camp at first light and move west toward the ridge where the bedrock showed and the water ran fast. Jules said we would not drag the sled through dark timber with that company at our backs. Finn bristled, then lowered his eyes. He sat again. His jaw worked, but no words came. The night wore on. We took turns walking slow circles inside the burning sticks to keep blood moving. The knocks came and went. The calls moved around us but never rushed. The smell hung over camp and then thinned and then returned. I thought of town, of noise and warm canvas and men crowding a stove, and then pushed the thought away because it would not help my legs hold steady. Harris counted under his breath, then stopped and stared at his boots. I told myself very small things. Lift left foot, place it, breathe. Lift right foot, place it, breathe. It kept my head quiet for a while. Around midnight, a new sound came from the cash tree. A brush on bark. A slow pull at the rope. Then a deep, steady exhale. The rope creaked. We all faced the tree. The meat swung once and then steadied. A hand came into the light from the far side of the trunk. Dark, heavy, brought across the palm. It slid over the rope knot, tested it, and withdrew. The knot held. The hand did not pull again. It was not hungry work. It was a measure. The rope fibers sang once more and then fell quiet. Jules moved one step and stopped. He said, steady. He did not raise his rifle. The hand did not return. The smell thickened and then pulled away. A knock sounded from our right, then 2 more from behind us. They were moving again, keeping us fixed to the ground, and no place in this clearing felt safe except the circle we had set. Near dawn, the calls stopped. The smell thinned. The dogs unclenched one at a time and stretched their front legs without leaving the sled. Finn stood and stomped his boots. Jules said we would hold until full light and then decide. He told us to drink coffee. The tin pot had a skin of ice on the side away from the fire. I broke it with a finger and poured. The heat ran through me and made my body feel real again. Morning showed more prints around the camp and a pair of deep impressions under the cash tree where something had braced its feet. The stride marks on the slope fell into a line that ran parallel to us and then cut up slope toward a stand of older trees that spaced themselves wider. We could see nicks on the trunks at a height above any man's reach. The marks were not clawed. They were flat, as if struck with a rock or a heavy stick. We held a short council without form. Finn wanted to move west to the ridge, and then north to a tributary that Harris said looked promising. On a map he no longer trusted. Harris wanted to leave the valley entirely and make for a known camp 3 days south, then decide whether to return later with more men. Jules said leaving in panic would be worse than staying 1 more day. He said we should ease the camp toward the open ground near the creek bend, where the trees fell back and sight lines were longer. He said he would go alone to the slope and look at the stand with the nicked trunks while we shifted the sled and the cache and broke the lean-to. He said to keep the burning sticks lit even in daylight. I did not want him to go alone, but I did not say it. He moved with care that had a plan in it, not bravery. He carried the rifle low and placed his boots where the ground was clear. Finn and I hauled the sled 10 paces at a time toward the bend, lifting the runners over roots. Harris broke the lean-to, stacked the boughs and coiled ropes with slow, neat turns. The dogs trotted beside us with their ears back and their tails low. They were eager to leave, but they stayed on command. Jules returned after an hour with frost on his beard and a new line in his face. He said the stand held nests, not woven grass, but beds made in forks of branches where the bark was rubbed smooth. He said he found hair caught on broken twigs, dark and coarse, longer than any bear hair he had seen. He said he did not touch the beds. He said he left no mark and came back by a wide circle, stepping in the old prints we had already made as much as he could. We finished moving the camp to the bend and set the fire where smoke could rise without getting trapped under branches. The creek opened there, and the ice held a clear edge where we could draw water without chopping. The sun gave little heat, but it changed the way the valley felt. The slope looked farther. The distance between trees grew. We ate and said little. Harris looked at his map again and tapped a point with a dull pencil. He said if we followed the creek down 2 miles, there would be a cut that led west to a pass through the Greybacks. He said the pass would take us into a basin with 2 creeks and a shallow lake. He said the bedrock should be closer to the surface there. Jules nodded but did not say we would go. He told us to test the left bank one more time, fast and clean, and to keep our heads on the edge of the timber. By noon we had the box set at the new spot and fed it steady for an hour. The color came better than before. Fine flakes showed on the mat, and a small flake lay in my pan that I could pick up with wet fingers. Finn grinned and said we were not cursed yet. Harris smiled without force for the first time in a day. I let the sight of gold settle in me and held it there, not as a promise, but as proof that the ground still followed rules in some places. The ground did not hold that peace for long. A cry came from upstream, not from the slope, from the creek bed itself. High and sharp, then deeper. Not human, not any animal I knew. The dogs leaped and strained at their leads, then sat again when Jules raised his hand. Water rippled beyond the ice edge and then went smooth. We stood without speaking. The cry came again, farther away. Jules said we would pull the riffles, bottle the concentrates, and be ready to move by last light. He did not say where. He did not have to. We kept working the box with quick hands. Every few minutes one of us turned to scan the timber. My back felt hollow from the pull between hope and the need to keep eyes on those trees. Finn tried to make a small joke about gold fines paying for new boots and let it die in the air before it became a real thing. Harris measured the concentrates with his eyes and nodded once. Jules watched the creek bend and the slope and the naked strip of sky and said nothing. In the late afternoon, when the light had a flat look, a figure stepped into full view on the slope above the bend. No cover, no tree trunk between us. It stood with legs apart and arms loose at its sides. Tall by a head and moreover any man I knew. Hair covered it in a thick layer except for the face, which had bare skin across the cheekbones and around the eyes. The chest was wide. The waist was narrow. The muscles in the forearms showed through the hair when it shifted its hands. It looked at us in a steady, level way. Not rage, not fear. An appraisal. It took 2 steps along the slope, light for its size, then stopped again. Jules spoke in a clear voice that did not shake. He said, "We are leaving." He said, "We mean no harm." He said, "We will not follow you." The figure did not move. I could not read its face beyond the eyes and the set of the mouth. It lifted its head a fraction and then turned and walked along the slope toward the stand with the beds. Not hurried, not slow. When it reached the shadow of the older trees, it faded from sight. Another figure showed for a second farther uphill and then was gone. We pulled the box at once and packed the gear in order. The sled took the weight with a groan. The dogs stood ready without needing a word. The fire went down to a safe bed of coals, and we kicked snow over it until no heat rose. Harris tied the concentrates bottle to the inside of the sled, where it would not break. Finn checked the ropes twice. Jules shouldered his rifle and took the lead on the trail down the creek. We moved out in a line with the dogs leaning hard. The trail felt new even though we had come in on it. Every turn looked tighter. Every shadow looked deeper. We kept our pace steady and did not run. Behind us the valley closed without any sound to mark our going. The knocks did not follow. The calls did not chase us. The smell did not ride our backs. The dogs pulled as if they knew where the trail would ease, and I let their rhythm set mine. I did not look over my shoulder until the bend took the campground out of sight. Then I glanced once and saw only trees and a pale strip of ice. We pushed along the creek until the trees opened to a narrow meadow where snow lay in a clean sheet and the light came down flat from the sky. The dogs slowed and looked back, ears high. Jules lifted his hand and we stopped. The silence pressed in again, the kind we had felt the first night. I heard nothing behind us, but my chest still tightened. Finn set the sled runners in a groove of snow and braced his boots. Harris glanced at his map without opening it, as if a folded square could help him read the dark. Jules pointed west, where a small cut ran from the meadow into rising ground. He said the pass lay that way. He said if we made the cut by sundown, we could camp on stone instead of in timber. We moved on with short steps. The cut rose in a steady grade, a shallow V pressed between banks of spruce. The dogs leaned hard into the straps, their breath pluming. My shoulders burned under the straps of my pack. We kept the rifles at hand, never slung. Every few minutes, one of us turned to check the trail behind. Nothing showed, but the sense of being watched had weight to it. Halfway up the cut, we found new tracks. Broad prints crossed the snow at a diagonal from one bank to the other. They were fresh, edges sharp, no crust over them. The stride reached longer than any man could stretch. Jules stopped and studied them without bending close. He said they were moving toward the ridge before us. He said they knew where we were headed. Finn cursed, a low string of words meant for no one, then tightened the sled ropes and urged the dogs faster. The grade steepened. The banks rose higher, pressing us into a narrow channel where the trees blocked most of the sky. My breath came ragged. Harris stumbled once and caught himself with the butt of his rifle in the snow. He looked pale and older than his years. I asked if he was fit to go on. He nodded once and kept climbing. At the top of the cut, we reached a saddle where rock broke through the snow. The trees spread thin and the wind had more room. We could see the basin Jules had spoken of, a wide hollow with two creeks that shone dark through the ice, and beyond it a frozen lake that lay still under the grey light. It should have felt like relief, but the basin looked raw and empty, ringed by slopes that carried dark bands of timber. Too much cover, too many places for eyes to wait. We made camp on a rise of rock that gave us sight on three sides. Jules said we would stay only until dawn. He said the dogs could not make another push without rest. We stacked wood high and cleared snow to set the fire on stone. The smoke rose clean into the sky, but I kept thinking how far it could be seen and by whom. The night came down fast. We set watches again. Finn took first with Harris. I lay on my blanket with the rifle under my arm and tried to keep one ear in sleep and one on the ground. The fire snapped and the wind pressed through the saddle in bursts. It was Harris's shout that woke me. I rolled and grabbed the rifle. The fire showed a shape at the edge of the rocks, broad and tall. Finn was already up, rifle leveled. Jules stepped between him and the figure with his hand raised. He said, "Wait." The figure stood still, no more than 30 paces out. The eyes caught the firelight, not glowing, but set deep under the brow. It lifted its arm and dropped something onto the rock, a bundle of branches bound with strips of bark. Then it turned and walked back toward the trees without a sound. We waited until the dark closed behind it. Jules went forward with careful steps and picked up the bundle. Inside the branches lay bones, not human, deer, or caribou, cracked clean for marrow. The bundle smelled of smoke, as if it had been held over fire. Jules set it down and covered it with a stone. He said it was a warning. He said it was a mark, telling us we were seen and measured. The rest of the night dragged. Every gust of wind seemed to carry a footfall. The dogs whined and circled tight but did not bark. At dawn we broke camp with numb hands and strained faces. We aimed for the pass on the far side of the basin. The basin crossing felt longer than any trail behind us. The snow lay deep and uneven. The sled groaned. Our legs burned. Shadows moved on the slopes, always just out of reach. Once on the far ridge, a figure walked clear against the sky for 10 full breaths before stepping down into cover. Too far for a rifle, too close to ignore. By late day, the pass opened ahead, a cut between two cliffs where the snow had drifted high. The dogs strained at the last climb. Finn shouted to keep them moving. Harris stumbled again and nearly fell. I grabbed his arm and pulled him through the drift. Then the sound came, a roar deep and harsh that rolled through the basin and rattled the snow from ledges. It was not a call to another. It was a claim. The dogs bolted against their ropes and the sled tipped. We hauled it upright and pushed forward with every scrap left in us. The roar came again, closer, echoing off the rock. We reached the pass at last and dropped into the shadow beyond. The wind cut through like a blade. The dogs pulled without command, desperate to be clear. We did not stop until the slope ran down into heavy timber that pointed south. Only when the light failed and the trees grew tight again did Jewel call a halt. He said we had crossed the line. He said we were out of their ground. He did not sound sure. We built no fire that night. We ate cold and silent and lay with our rifles in our hands. The dark pressed close, but no knocks came. No calls, no smell. The silence was heavy, but it was different, less sharp, as if the eyes had lifted. At dawn, we pushed on again, following the draw south toward known country. The trail grew easier with each mile. Harris's color returned. Finn's jaw eased. Jules kept glancing back, but his shoulders lost some of their weight. I walked behind the sled and let the rhythm take me. We reached a trapper's trail 3 days later and found sign of men. Clean boot prints and a cut pole. The relief was real this time. That night we built a fire without fear and let the dogs rest with their bellies full. None of us spoke of the tracks, the whistles, or the figure on the slope. The bones under the stone at the saddle stayed where we had left them. We made it to Dawson with the bottle of concentrates and a story we did not tell. Finn sold his share of gear and went south. Harris booked passage east with his notes. Jules vanished upriver with a new rifle. I kept my pan and a little gold, but the valley stayed with me more than the color in the riffles ever did.